Hello, everyone. Today is May 6th, 2020. This is the Data Protection Workgroup meeting. This meeting will be recorded and uploaded to YouTube. Let's get started. Let me share my screen. Today's agenda. So today we will be doing a design review of the volume group cap. There are several people asking about it. So let's take a look and discuss about it today. And then we will give an update on the container notifier proposal, which we discussed in previous meetings. And after that, we can have some open issues if there are people have any issues they want to discuss. So let me open this. So this is the volume group proposal. So I will first go over the summary and motivation. So this proposal, we want to introduce a volume group API to manage multiple volumes together, and a group snapshot API to take a snapshot of a volume group. So here we listed several use cases. There is a cap. So this is actually the application snapshot cap that introduces API to do application snapshot and backup. But there are also other cases that are not covered by that cap. The first use case is that we can have a volume group that allows users to manage multiple volumes together, and those volumes could belong to the same application. For example, they can use this to group all the volumes in the same stateful set. And then the second use case is that I think for some storage systems, maybe not a lot, but for some storage systems, they always manage the volumes in the same group. Even for them to create one single volume, they have to create a group first, and then create one volume in that group. So this would be convenient. And then the third use case is that we can also use this construct as a source to take a snapshot for all the volumes in the same volume group. And then if the storage system can provide consistent group snapshot support, then they can use this to do that. And the fourth use case is that this is, of course, is not something that we are going to address immediately, but just mentioned as a potential future use case. We can also use this construct to do a group replication if a storage system supports it. Use case 5 is, this is for the volume placements use case. So we could use this one to say that we want to spread volumes across the storage pools or stack them on the same storage pool. But this one, since there are actually, there is already a cap that is focusing on storage pool. So I think this is something that I'd like to figure out whether we can make a decision on this one, whether we should just focusing on this other cap, volume placement, and not using the group concept for that. So this is to be determined. And the sixth use case is that this can also be used together with that application snapshot cap. So this would be one resource managed by that application snapshot CRD. The seventh is that if some applications don't use the workload APIs such as stateful set, then they probably can just use this volume group and they can still manage those volumes together. So those are the use cases. that I have here. Are there any questions regarding the use cases? Okay. Okay, so goals. So goals is to provide an API to manage module volumes together in a group, and provide an API to take snapshot of a group of volumes. And the third goal, so we can also use this one to do volume placement, but we want to decide whether we want to do that or not. And the fourth goal is that I think this group API should be extensible, so that if we want to support other features, then we should be able to use it. Non-goals.
Xing.
Yeah.
Sorry, go ahead.
No, go ahead.
I have a couple questions over here. After went through the use cases and goals.
Okay. Yeah.
It looks like some of the goals and some of the use cases, they don't necessarily fit into each other's picture. For example, some of the storage systems does require volumes get provisioned the time when you specify when you create the group.
Yeah.
Because for them to be able to support topology, they require let's say a consistent volume group to be physically allocated in same rack or something like that, right?
Yeah. So
first of all, this doesn't. Sorry, let me finish.
Yeah, sure.
This doesn't apply to existing volumes in the system already, in the Kubernetes system already. That's the first thing. And the second thing is that group snapshot doesn't really make sense especially for some of the use cases you just up there. For example, if you want to simply just manage the life cycle of group volumes, using volume group to achieve that seems to be a little bit too much from my perspective, because effectively you cannot really do volume group consistent snapshots for those randomly grouped together volumes. And secondly, even though underlying storage system does support group consistency snapshot, we ran into the risk where if the volume are not allocated on the same rack or something like that, which the underlying storage system does require. However, we still expose this volume group API to the users. It makes this feature not usable.
Yeah, I think there are definitely a lot of things that we need to consider for. So in the API section, there are actually like different ways for us to create a volume group. So yeah, I think we can go through that and see, do we want to be able to start with something small, and then is that something that we can make progress on? Yeah, definitely there were a lot of concerns. That's why this actually, we started discussing this actually a long time ago, and then I think kind of getting stuck because there are a lot of concerns.
I guess one of my question is really, do we need to support this many goals over here, right?
Yeah, so that's why I want to bring this up, right? So it's especially I think the volume group snapshot and the volume placement, those are two very different goals, right? I think initially we started with group snapshot and then volume placement. I think this is something that was added later. So I do want to make a decision and then see what we want to.
I was going to say actually add even one more goal here, which would be consistency groups. You have volumes that you can put into a consistency group, and they all ensure consistency across all the volumes in the group. And I understand kind of the more use cases you couple together, the more difficult it is to get this across the line. But we're talking about core Kubernetes APIs, and we want to kind of make them as generic and reusable as possible. So I would suggest try to at least look at all the use cases and see, would it fit? Does it make sense? Can we tackle this use case? I'm okay with trying to tackle more use cases rather than fewer.
Okay, so we do have this actually.
Sorry, what do you mean by consistent group over here? Are you saying the consistent snapshot, or what?
No.
What do you mean?
I mean kind of the storage functionality that lets you say these group of volumes are going to be internally consistent, crash consistent, not just crash consistent for a single volume, but across the entire group of volumes.
So for snapshot, at least we do have it covered here, and for replication, it's so we can also mention that one. So I think there was one.
This is independent of replication. It's independent of snapshot. It's a feature that some storage systems have. Right. So those usually it's either they support consistent group snapshot or consistent group replication. So some storage systems they kind of support those two as two different features. Some can support both. So here I have this consistent group snapshot here. Replication, I think I mentioned here actually. So here I did mention a consistent group replication here. So it is covered actually by, it's like a sub case of 3 and 4. Maybe I can add a sub bullet to make it more obvious. Okay, if we can keep moving forward, I can comment offline on this.
Yeah, okay, sure. Okay, so I do think this part is important that, if we want to introduce this, we want to make this one generic and extensible. Okay, and then now goes, okay, so I just mentioned here that we are not really, although we mentioned this use case, but this may be something in the future. We're not really focusing on talking about replication group here. So that's the non-goal. Go to the proposal section. So here we are proposing to introduce 3 new CRDs: volume group class, and group snapshot. To create a new volume group, so here we have 2 ways. One way is you create a group with existing volumes, and either you provide a list of PVCs or just use a selector. And the second way is create an empty group first, then create an individual volume with that group ID, and then basically add one new volume to the group at a time. And then for snapshot, a group snapshot can be created from a source volume group. And the restore, so restore, there are also, we could support it in 2 ways. Maybe we can start simple, but then, so there are 2 possible ways. That one way is, actually the second one, we can just create 1 volume from a snapshot at a time, and then create a volume, create a group with all of those volumes. This is one way so this way, I think it's easier. And then the second way is that we directly use the group snapshot as a source. So we can just take one group from the group snapshot with 1 API.
Xing, I have a question about that.
Okay.
Is this API meant to be purely at the Kubernetes layer, or is any of this going to be at the CSI driver level?
So this one would need to have a CSI driver layer APIs. I didn't really write those out because I want to see if we can agree on the higher level use cases first before dive deeper. But we do need to have CSI interfaces as well.
Yeah, I think that would be like an implementation detail.
Okay.
I'm not so sure that it's just an implementation detail. I think that, especially because of
it is part of design, of course, not just this. We do need to have that as part to make this design complete. I just thought, we have a lot to discuss, even just to figure out whether we want all of this or not. before
Yes,
we
yes.
even that's
the
why
high-level design is the most important. I totally agree with that. But
yeah,
I worry that when you create too many options in the high-level design, the implementation can get exponentially complicated.
So I think we could simplify things. I was thinking even like, for example, this, I can think of like, let's start with just this option, then then we can decide whether to add this one later, right? So this is one thing. And then for this create group, of course, we also have like two options. We can decide whether we want to start with something simple. But then we also have this other volume placement use case, right? So then if this is already existing volumes, then that probably doesn't make sense anymore. These volumes are already placed, right? So for that, then we will need this. For volume placement, then we will need to say create a new volume, right? Otherwise, for existing volume, then that one really does not have a place here. So yeah, so we need to make some decisions and then maybe narrow down to say, well, should we start with something simple, or so. But I think with you, we should at least list all of those options and then talk about them.
I have a question on restore.
Restore, okay.
Yeah. So what is the claim state on a restored volume? I mean, it has to be addressed. These are volumes which have data. They just can't be left there in a free pool for some provisioning to pick up.
Yeah, it is it has a data. Yeah, because this is like when you create a volume from Snapshot, right? So there's data in it. Yes.
Right. So a outstanding PVC could somehow match these volumes and snap up these things which may not have been the intent. So what protects them from provisioning?
So you mean how do they know that like they need to which snapshot to find? Is that the question?
No, I mean, someone's doing a restore, not a problem, right?
Yeah.
You construct a bunch of PVs at the end result of that. But there's no claim on those PVs at this point, which means an outstanding PVC could, under the covers, just pick it up. While
here we are only I think here we are only talking about like create a new PVC. So I probably should make this more clear.
Okay. So
yeah, this is more like consistent with what we have for the existing snapshot feature, the existing create volume from snapshot feature. Okay. So you need to create a new PVC from it. That's what we have currently. So that's what I have in mind. Yeah, okay. Because otherwise, I think we'll need something else, that we need to design something else to support the other cases. But yeah. Okay, so for volume placement support, then we did assume that there were already straight pools exists. And then in the volume group class, there was a allowed topology field for us to decide the accessibility of the volumes to the pools and the nodes. I mentioned this one, it does not have a capacity. I'm just saying it's that's the other cap. The storage pool has the capacity. Group does not have a capacities really. So, okay, so let me go over the definitions. Volume group class. So here, right, so we have a driver field, we have the parameters, then we have this field to specify whether we support, whether this class supports group snapshot or not. This is a Boolean, and then this is allowed topologies. So like, for example, this API, I was thinking, I don't know if we really need it. So that's something we can also discuss if we want to make it simplified. Maybe we don't really need this. We just need to know if it supports group snapshot or not. And then if we want to support the placement part, then we need to have something like this. Maybe it can be just individual fields instead of a new API object. So that I'm not sure. Now the next one is volume group. So it has a spec and status. So in the spec, we have volume group class name, and then we have a source here. So this is optional, right? If it's a null, that means that we'll create an empty volume group. Otherwise, we'll create that with some existing PVCs. So the source, so actually, let me just look at this one here. So this is a source field. So it can have a PVC list or a selector. So that means we are just adding existing PVCs to this group if we are choosing one of these two. Otherwise, if we are choosing this one, then that's for restore. Of course, this is something that we need to discuss. Do we want to support this one, right? What do we want to just at restore time, we can actually just create one volume from snapshot at a time instead of introducing this. But this is something that we can discuss. And then if this source is null, then that's an empty volume group. Status field, so we will have the PVC list, so we know what volumes are added, what PVCs are added to this group. And then we have this indicating whether this one is created successfully or not. So we have this ready. And then also have an arrow field. And for group snapshot, also have a spec and status for the group snapshot spec. So here we have this source. So maybe we don't really need, maybe we can just have a volume group name instead of this object. This is if we need to support more than one kind of the source, but since we only expect to have one.
Back to volume group real quick, was that namespace or not namespaced?
Oh, those are namespaced. Did I say that? Oh, I need to add those. Those are namespaced. So the class would be non-namespaced, but volume group snapshot, those should all be namespaced. So I will add that.
And so just to make sure I got the flow correct in my head, the volume group class object is not namespaced?
Yeah.
And who creates the volume group object?
Volume group will be user. Yeah, will be user.
The user creates it with a volume group class name.
Right.
The spec filled out, and the source, which points to some existing PVCs. And do they also point to a volume group class?
Yeah, so volume group spec has this volume group class name field, right?
Okay, got it.
That's, yeah, and then the source could be if we are creating if we are just creating that with existing volumes, then it's going to be either a PVC list or a selector that select the PVCs that we want.
Okay.
Now this one is really for, the third one is really for restore. So if we don't want it, then we can start without this, I think. So this is like, yeah, so the first two, I probably need to add more comments. So the first two are for creating a new volume group. This one is for creating, this is for like restore.
I see.
Yeah.
Is there actually is there actually a storage system that supports restoring a whole group?
Yeah, so actually I see that a lot of implementations, they actually just create one volume at a time. They just create a volume from snapshot at a time.
I think the important thing would be, if you're restoring a whole group, is you want to restore all of the individual volumes and then have the resulting volumes end up in a new group.
Right. Yeah. So I need to double check on that. I think I remember I look at the implementations in Cinder. Seems to be usually they just create individual volumes from snapshots and then put them in the groups. But what I was trying to say then is that I don't know if any storage system actually require. I mean, you can only give this whole group snapshot as a source. I think usually they just create one at a time, but of course they put them in this group. So I think that's, so this one is, I think it's more for the convenience. It's probably not necessary. It's just convenience. We just, okay.
Well, I was going to say that there are storage systems where the construction of the group is such that you can't just add existing things into it unless they're new. And so
correct.
This having a whole group restore would be the only way to enable creating a new group with existing data, because
okay, let's actually go back to this. I think I have that somewhere, maybe in the beginning. So I understand the case that you're talking about. So that can actually be covered by this. So create an empty group first, and then create each individual volume. So those volume will be like a volume created from a snapshot. So you can just you can actually do a create volume from snapshot and then add that to this group at the same time. That should work for those systems.
Right, and for those systems, you would have to similarly, when you're restoring into a group, know the ID of the group that you're restoring into before you.
So I think so I think this workflow would work, which I think this is not. I think this one is actually not required. I haven't seen evidence that this is required. I'm just saying this is like a convenience. But so for those systems, they need to have a ID, right? So they can create an empty group first, and then they can create volume from snapshot, and then put that in that group. So that, so this would work. But this means that we also need to, I think we need to make an enhancement there for the create volume from snapshot case there, because then we need to consider that the group ID as well.
But you're going to have all kinds of restrictions about exactly what will and won't work at restore time, depending on the implementation in the back end. And my worry about all of this is always that so many backends have such brittle requirements that like no API will realistically.
So my understanding is because I worked on this before, so I think this case would work for everyone. I haven't seen any that this does not work. The case that does not work is you can, for some storage systems, you cannot add one individual volume, one existing individual volume to existing group. That you cannot do. But if it's new, then that would work for everybody.
So it would work for a lot. I would be careful about saying everybody.
Well, so I mean, because since I did this in Cinder, right? So I know what is supported. So we can clearly list those out here, like what are the things that might be a problem. I understand there are definitely. I think that was why that we studied this a long time ago and then kind of put it aside for a while. So there are definitely issues, but I think we just need to list all of those.
So Xing, sorry, this is Dave. So for the group snapshot, that I think the idea of taking a group snapshot is good, but then that's going to output like a group snapshot ID, right?
Group snapshot. So you will have you would have a group snapshot ID right at the end.
So is that something that you did in Cinder? I mean, because we definitely don't have anything even close to that in vSphere. And I'm not sure if other
ID? Well, you can use names, but we are talking about names here. So I mean, I know I kind of like here should be actually because in Kubernetes we usually say names. So I think that's
no. The group ID is fine, but the snapshot, right? Because when
what is the problem? Yeah,
I'm trying to understand. So from the driver from underneath, we're going to expect that we say group snapshot. And then there is the expectation that it will come back and say, I took a group snapshot. Here's the snapshot ID of the group.
So you should have that, right? You're saying that you can't get that?
Well, we don't have a group snapshot at the moment. And if we did do a group snapshot, we'd probably snap a whole bunch of things together. Which get individual snapshot IDs, but not necessarily have an ID for the group.
That is kind of unique for,
because we're going to need this when we do restore, right? Because we're going to lose all of our Kubernetes metadata, and the storage system has to be able to come back and say, okay, you want group snapshot ID 5, and that consists of these other snapshots. And I'm not sure if anybody does that.
So
is that standard for other people?
What makes you think we're going to lose all the Kubernetes metadata?
So you could
that my data center burned down.
But you surely you stored the metadata somewhere so that you know what to refer to when you're reconstructing everything. You have to have something to start from.
Do you have any?
Yeah, but so how am I going to get my group snapshot ID from the driver level, right? I mean, how is that going to relate?
So we were actually able to even do this for like LVM in Cinder. So I was thinking that should be able to do this.
So like we have like VM snapshots. Get an
yeah.
ID from the underlying system.
Okay.
So would this
is not really, but this is not necessarily a VM snapshot, right?
No, I know. So would this be like a synthesized ID that we strictly keep at the Kubernetes layer, and we don't expect the driver to support this?
I actually need to think about that because in Cinder, when we implement this one, we did implement this one even for a storage system that does not have like consistent group snapshot, right? So they don't really have this concept on this storage system, but we allow them to kind of group things together. So it's mostly the information would be stored at the Cinder layer would have something. It's just and yeah, I think that should work because like in Kubernetes database, right? So you would have this group snapshot name, and then you also have other individual snapshot.
Sure.
So here, so let me actually, I think this is probably how I need to go back and check, but I think this is probably what we did over there is you have, so for volume group spec would have a group snapshot name.
So like the restore procedure would be, we'd need to recreate the individual snapshot CRDs. Then create
you should already have the individual snapshots, right? So you take, when you take snapshot, you take individual snapshot, right? And then you put them, you basically for each snapshot, you would have this group snapshot name. So you know that they're together. This is how you say, okay, all of the snapshot belong to this group.
This actually brings up an interesting point. I'm thinking based off of what Dave said, why does restore even need to be coupled at a group level? Right, it makes sense when you take a snapshot that, hey, I want these snapshots to be crash consistent. After the snapshots have been created, why does the restore have to be grouped?
Yeah, I think that's not necessary, right? So I put that as a optional, basically, what's this one?
So Saad, they don't have to be grouped at restore time, but if you want to end up with a new group of things that you can again take a consistent snapshot of, then you might be required to tell the system that at the time you do the restore. Otherwise, the result of the restore won't be something you can turn back into a group.
So you could do that just by creating a new empty group first, and then you just create one volume from snapshot at a time and make sure that one is added to that group. So that should work. So I'm thinking this one is not required.
So at a high level, that's true, but the implementation details for that will get really, really messy. I think.
Well,
I guess I'm also like I'm agreeing with Ben here that like, how do I took my crash consistent group snapshot and then I want to get that back. Would I then specify each individual snapshot? Like that seems unwieldy.
Yeah, so you would know at this time, right? So you have your snapshot have a group snapshot name, so you know what a snapshot you need. Then you basically just you create a volume group first, then you create a volume from a snapshot, add that to the group. So you do this one at a time until you got to all of them. Restored all of them.
So the assumption there is that the storage system supports adding volumes one by one, right? So we should be very clear.
I haven't seen anyone. I mean, but yeah, at least in Cinder that those two types of storage system, like either block or file, they all can at least do this part.
I'm just thinking from a user perspective. Like I'm gonna hide all that behind just specifying a group snapshot and doing that for them.
What do you mean? You want to make it easier for them? You want them to just
to just
click?
give me the group.
Then if that's the case, then that's the reason to have this one, right? So this is for convenience. But I see that driver, when they implement this one, they just create one at a time anyway.
Yeah,
so that's why I thought this is not really required. Yeah.
So I expect,
I guess
I expect there will be implementations of this where the group snapshot will be implemented by basically co-locating all the data for all the volumes on one thing and taking one giant snapshot of it in such a way that it can't be restored piece by piece. But of course, the driver can pretend to restore things piece by piece by, when the first restore is requested, restore the whole group, and then as other restores are requested, you could just provide pointers to.
I think this should work because at least I have seen this. People have implemented this one, right? A lot of drivers have implemented this one, so that's.
Yeah, I'm trying to think through how ugly that interface is going to look if what the backend is actually doing is taking one giant snapshot of everything, and the only way it can restore it is to restore everything. If the higher level interface.
But they actually have. So they do have those individual snapshot IDs actually, right? So it's not like
but
identify those.
If what you actually have is just one snapshot of everything, all those other snapshot IDs would have to be synthesized and fake, which there's nothing wrong with doing that because you can make it work, but it gets messy when you do the restore. So basically, you only have one thing to restore, but you're pretending that you have a bunch of smaller things that you're restoring one by one.
Do you have the ability, Ben, on your side to restore from a volume group ID?
I mean, it depends how we write this. We have lots of different backends, lots of different software implementations. Some of them would actually be much more granular and have lots of snapshots. You can just consistently take them. Other ones, the way we would do it would be to just basically have one big thing that we would internally partition, pretend it's lots of small things, and then take a snapshot of that whole thing at once. And then when you do a restore, you get a restore of the whole thing, even if you only wanted as individual pieces. And we'd have to do the bookkeeping on our end to remember that we restored a bunch of stuff you didn't ask for. And then if you do ask for it later, we would say, oh, I already have that, here it is.
So I think this is kind of the key to this whole design, or the hardest challenge, is that we're going to have to support a bunch of different storage systems. Some storage systems may allow you to create an empty volume group and then add in volumes at a time. Others may only allow you to add empty volumes, and there may be some storage systems that don't allow you to create an empty volume group. They say you must specify, 5 volumes at creation time together, and that's it. So we have to think through those use cases, and then on the snapshot, on the snapshot restore side, we have the same problem of, you may have storage systems like Dave was mentioning where they don't really have a concept of restoring by group ID. They just create a bunch of individual volumes, and they would have to figure out how to synthesize a group ID. Or the ones that you're mentioning, Ben, where they don't have individual snapshot IDs, they only have a group ID. And so we need to decide whether we're going to support all of these use cases. If so, what is that API going to look like? Or if not, which subset are we going to support and why?
Yeah, and the latter is okay. We can intentionally say we're not supporting this case, but we should be upfront about that.
Yep.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Sure. Should add all of those in the document at least, and then.
It would be great to get real world kind of input from some of the storage vendors on the call, and maybe offline if we could, to say, hey, who can support which mode? That way we have real data to operate off of.
Yeah, so please, either comment on the cap or reach out to me, or let us know.
Another thing interesting over here is that, do we expect volume group snapshot to manage the life cycle of the volume snapshots created by it?
When it deletes, it should, yes. It does delete it.
You know, since the worm snapshot objects created by the worm group snapshot is visible to users, right? It is possible. There's a risk that users may directly use those snapshots.
Yeah. So yeah, that's a good point. So we could. So those are the things that we probably need to. The certain things we probably need to like say, how do we prevent those? If you know we don't want them to delete one snapshot from a group snapshot, then then it could cause the whole group snapshot to be invalid, right? So we need to think about how to disable that. Not sure it's we need a webhook type of thing. So yeah, so things like that definitely we.
I mean, if the direction is that when create a worm group snapshot, we have some newly added CSI call, I would say putting worm snapshot as an intermediate over here doesn't make sense because eventually the worm group snapshot should be managing all this and exposing those to end users seems to be a little bit too much. If it's on the other hand, we dedicate individual snapshot creation, then yeah, it makes sense. We need
but individual snapshot will be created. Yeah, they will be created.
Why it has to be created if you're going through the CSI call directly?
That's how actually, yeah, well, so if you look at this case that we are actually creating one at a time, it's not like either. So if you look at this, we are actually either we're adding existing PVCs or we are, you're talking about snapshot, not talking about the volume group, right? You're talking about only the snapshot group snapshot part, not talking about the volume part. Okay.
Yes.
So I think that also is tied to we need to decide how are we going to do restore. If we can only restore one at a time, then we do need to have those, right? Otherwise, maybe we can look at, if we only need to support this one type of restore, just, we have just restore from this group snapshot. We don't really need to worry about the individual pieces, then maybe we can hide those. But also I think maybe for a lot of drivers, they couldn't really support that. So that's the thing. If we want this one to work for everybody, then we need to expose those.
Sure. I mean, it really
so
depends
that's another
on
thing
how...
that we need to, so I think that's something we need to decide. I know those, that's actually pretty, those are the things that are a little weird, right? So you're really supposed to use only the group snapshot, but then you also have those individual snapshots that are shown as resources, and how are you going to protect them from being deleted by accident, right? So those are the things that we need to decide how to do. So, okay, so and for group snapshot, then we have status, then we have this ready to use flag, and also we have the list of volume snapshots. So in volume snapshot spec, we have the group snapshot name, and then here, so I have this one is because if we want to support both, if we want to use this to support both, use this to take a group snapshot and placement, then this could be in different groups. That's why this is a string. This is a like array instead of just one name. So this is the YAML examples. So if we create so this is the group class. So it's a group snapshot. So this is supports group snapshot. So we have this to true, set to true. And then this is the volume group belongs to this class. So this basically says that, okay, I want to add all of those volumes that matches the label into this volume group. And that's that belongs to this volume group class 1. In a group snapshot, we just specify the source is this volume group. And the PVC belongs to this volume group. So we'll have this group name here. And then if we also do that for group for the placement, then in this placement class, then we'll have this topologies, and then in the group we specify the placement group class, and then the PVC. Then it's possible for it to belong to both the volume group snapshot and also placement. Then in that case, it belongs to two different groups. So here it supports a volume group that supports group snapshot and also supports a placement group. So yeah, so this will get very complicated if we really want to support all of this. Yeah, so that's it. I haven't added all the details on what we are going to do for CSS spec and how this controller would handle this, and a lot of details. Of course, it's not here yet. Just trying to get some high level feedback first. So obviously I need to update this, and there's a lot of concerns that we talked about today. So any other comments on this, Cap?
Yeah, I'm excited about this this Cap. I think it's going to be a fun evolution of the current API. I do think it's going to be challenging because there's so many different types of storage systems.
Yeah.
So what I did was add a item to tomorrow's SIG storage call to talk to vendors about this.
Okay.
And we can say, hey, we've got this KEP. In order for this to work for everyone, we need to kind of know what works for you, and we can start getting their input.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, that sounds good. Now about this part, do we still want to consider this for placement group? We haven't really talked too much about
see placement group as important. I don't know if that was handled by the other KEP.
Right.
I think this is more kind of independent from that.
Yeah, I would say for now, because the whole volume placement discussion is still ongoing, let's leave it out of here, the initial proposal, to, kind of
simplify
reduce
it,
the scope and avoid confusion. And, in the future, we can look at potentially adding it, but
okay, yeah, sure.
For now, I think
I would think before alpha, we should have a story for if we plan to do placement via volume groups, we should have a path at least towards that. It doesn't necessarily have to be part of alpha, but we should scope the design.
But I think right now this design is already tackling so much.
Yeah.
And adding one more thing
it's kind of hard.
just makes it it's really hard to follow, and it'll be confusing.
I agree. I just don't want us to kind of paint ourselves into a corner by focusing on one or two use cases, implementing that, and then coming back and realizing, it doesn't actually work.
So a suggestion I have is instead of sprinkling all of the use cases together, separate them into each section and be like, this is what the API looks like for this use case. This is what the API looks like for this use case.
Okay, so you want to separate
that way,
the group snapshot group snapshot instead of placement. Separate those two. You basically mean that.
Yeah, right? Because right now it's the design is switching back and forth between all of the different use cases to explain each of the fields. So it's kind of hard to get a good end-to-end picture of a particular use case.
Okay.
And that way it also gives us the ability to be for the first phase, we're going to tackle this one or two use cases. For the second phase, here's ideas we have how to address the other use cases, but we don't have to, really get iron out the API and, you know, get the details for these use cases yet.
Okay. Yeah, makes sense.
So I have a question. Is the provisioning user, the user that's doing the provisioning, is the plan is they would be aware, you had the 2 bullets of whether you add the volumes to the storage group at the beginning or whether you tag the volumes dynamically with the storage group. Do they need to be aware of which drivers support which method, or is the expectation that all drivers will support both methods, which we've heard some kind of fit with one or the other? So I'm at Dell and we have like 5 different systems and they do things slightly differently. My concern is, what is the user experience when he tries to provision against this?
Yeah, so I think that's something that we need to discuss, right? So if your drivers, some drivers can only support one way, the other driver can support a different way. Is that what you're trying to say? Or can they do things the same way? Can all your drivers support the same kind of way to create a volume group?
Well, I'm trying to understand what the expectations are.
Oh, okay. I think we need to decide like which was the way to go, right? So, so I think this one, most drivers should be able to support this, but this one I think is very useful. I also think that, you know, you should, of course, then decides that the PVCs that you selected has to be correct, right? If you say it's a consistent group, but if they're not on the same pool, maybe your system cannot support a consistent group, right? So maybe that's a problem. So I think this one, the first one would be harder. They could get it wrong depending on what you support. But if you just want to group them together, not really saying guaranteeing consistency, then that's probably okay. So you just group everything together that is in the same application. So I mean, I think it depends.
There's also the concern that no matter what we design, like the people who consume this API or the applications that consume this API may prefer one or the other mechanism to the exclusion of the other one, and that's going to drive what people actually implement, right? If we design this to give you 2 options, but in practice everyone uses just one of them, then vendors are going to ignore the other one, because what would be the point?
So yeah, so probably that's something that we would also like to have some input from vendors, right? What do they think is more useful? Maybe we can start one to implement with rather than supporting both, right? So maybe that's something that we also like to.
Well, and by vendors, you mean like the application vendors who would write the snapshot applications, right? Not the storage vendors.
I think we need input from both, right? So storage vendors, they need to be able to support this.
Just to give one input here, even it is going to be applicable from a storage vendor side as well. Just take a case of the replication group, which you might think to use that as a use case for this, because in Diamante, we have some construct like replication group where we use the similar construct as a volume group and PVC group. And replication just creates this volume group based on the application, which needs to be consistent from application point of view. And then it just binds all those PVC in a group and take a crash consistent snapshot of all the PVC which are part of that group, and then takes the copy on the DR side. So the same can be applicable for the backup as well, right? So it all depends on that, what all application you want to bring into that consistency group and how those are related, and what's the user requirement in terms of honoring that crash consistency.
Right. So if you want to support application consistency, then then there is another proposal that we're working on, which is to quiet application. So then the application can do something like that. I think we were talking about earlier, it's like storage system consistency.
So our assumption was we would always take consistent snapshots if they were a group, but if we're going to allow certain storage systems to take snapshots of groups, but they're not going to be consistent, there probably
there
needs to be a way to expose to the user whether the group is completely consistent or not.
So
as a
there are
return
two
value.
aspects of consistency, right? One, we are talking about application consistent, and where you might have distributed application using this group, or another aspect is the crash consistent. So I think mainly we are talking here in terms of the crash consistent snapshot, right? Not any application level.
Yeah. So right. Yeah. So here we are actually talking. Yeah, because for application level consistent, then we can achieve that using this execution hook or content notifier that we can mention, something like that. Yeah. So I think we are already at the top of the hour. So we can come back and talk about this more later.
I had one last question before we wrap this up. So we are also adding a support to add any PVC in that group dynamically, right? Depending on the need, because just to start with, you might have created that volume group, but later on you added more volumes to the particular application. So you're saying
you're talking about adding an existing. Are you talking about adding one? So after the group is created, adding one existing volume to the group?
Yes.
Yeah, so I think that's the one that we need to be a little bit more careful, because some storage system cannot do that. So, but if we are supporting this, this first case, then we are actually kind of saying that is okay, because you have existing volumes. So I think we need to at least describe what's the problem with some storage system. They have to know a group ID ahead of time when they create it, so they can't.
One real example I can give, right? Suppose if you have one application, for that you are using 3 volumes just to start with, and you have some replication policy which just creates a group with all the PVCs being part of that group, and you take a snapshot, consistent snapshot of that group, and then you replicate to the DR side. Now, after some point of time, I add another 2 volumes to the same application. But the consistency group crash consistency might again depends on the volumes which are part of that application, right? So I want to again add those new PVC to the same existing volume group and then take the snapshot. So that is a valid use case.
I understand. I completely understand. Yeah, I was just saying that that's a thing. There are some storage systems cannot support that. So, but that's something we definitely need to discuss and see whether we want to support that or not. Yeah, add an existing one to. Yeah, definitely. Yeah.
Sure. Thanks.
Okay, so we'll stop sharing now. I think we have some other topic we will continue in the next meeting. Thanks, everyone. Okay, that's it.
All right, thank you.
Thanks.
Take care.
Thanks, everyone. Bye.
Thanks.